And on behalf of the Community Action Partnership, we want to welcome you to today's discussion. As we know, poverty is a very complex reality for many of the families and communities that you as community action agencies serve on a daily basis. It requires for us to be innovative and strategic and basically engage in best practices in order to improve our outcomes. And certainly we see this whole notion of bundling services or bundled services as an effective way to do so. So we look forward to learning more from our presenters on today, whom I will introduce momentarily. As we begin, I just want to remind everybody that the Learning Community or the Learning Communities Resource Center is here to help build the network's capacity around fighting poverty. We know that fighting poverty rests at the heart of what we do as a network, and we have worked very hard to identify key approaches and strategies, bundling services being one of those, to help build the network's capacity in this regard. It is Jeannie Chapman who has said to us that we must be in tune to the right issues as we think about how we might create effective strategies for fighting poverty more effectively. And so with this in mind, I would like to invite everybody to just take a moment to pause as I say the Community Action Promise. Feel free to say it along with me or to yourselves. But really, as we think about any of these innovative strategies or approaches, they are very much grounded in this promise that we believe in and assert as a network. And it is community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we're dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And so then as we think about this whole notion of bundling services, the partnership is pleased to partner with ICF International. ICF has been a long-standing partner of ours within the Learning Communities Resource Center, and they have been careful to help us to identify research and resources that support those best practices or those innovative practices. And so today's webinar will highlight that research or those resources. And I want to sort of make a distinction here and say that today's session is exactly that. It's about highlighting the resources. It's not so much about it's not so much about sort of the technical aspects of implementation. We have future sessions and previous sessions that we have offered in the past that will give the network an opportunity to hear firsthand from agencies and other experts in this whole area of bundled services or integrative strategies. The key to keep in mind is that ICF just has a wealth of access to the resources, and they are highlighting those for us so that we can have quick, easy access to those as we sort of think about the overall bundled services framework. And so next point is the Community Action Partnership will host its annual convention in Austin, Texas, the end of August of this year, August 31st through September the 2nd. And we have several sessions that are being hosted by the Learning Communities Resource Center that are specifically aligned with the notion of bundled services, and we wanted to bring those to your attention as well. One being your organization bundling services, getting data and analytics, and the other session being siloed data, facilitated by Paige Teagarden from Garrett County Community Action. The next session, Tools for Planning Financial Capability Programs, facilitated by CFED, and then building a two-generation approach to improving family economic security and well-being and addressing rural poverty and rural impact, a two-generation demonstration. So all of those sessions are specifically aligned with this whole notion of bundled services or integrated services, and if you haven't registered for the conference, we certainly encourage you to register, and you can almost consider these set of presentations to be a package or a mini track of sorts. So we hope that agencies would decide to participate in these presentations during the convention in August. And so without further ado, I just want to also just say that the National Webinar Series itself focuses on themes related to the specific anti-poverty approaches, and really it's our way to highlight or showcase to the entire network what we are learning about the various topics, whether it's two-generation strategies or bundled services, financial capability, whatever that topic might be. And so hopefully you'll continue to participate in these presentations as we continue in the next several months. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. They are Kristen Abner and Courtney Barthel from ICF. And Courtney and Kristen will pass the baton over to you, so you might share a little bit more about yourselves and lead us through today's presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I just saw Tiffany. I'm hoping folks can hear me. We were having some audio. Great. Okay. I didn't want to talk to no one. So I am really excited to be here today to talk with you all about bundled services. As you all know, bundling services for CAP agencies is not a new approach, but we're hoping really today to give you some information on resources that are out there that you can use, and also what we really kind of pride ourselves on doing here at ICF is really kind of translating that research into practice. So we'll give you an overview of the resources, and then what we'll do is really kind of talk about how you can translate that for your own work. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the self-sufficiency research clearinghouse that we run here at ICF for the Administration for Children and Families, Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. And I'll give you an overview of the website and information on how you can go in and get resources that you need related to this topic, but really, you know, any topic across the self-sufficiency spectrum. So as you all know, helping move families out of poverty is a really complex issue, and it's really hard given the fragmented system of human service delivery. It makes moving towards self-sufficiency more difficult. So in order to streamline human services, many states and localities are considering a bundled service approach to service delivery. And it really grows from this concept of wraparound services, also a concept that community action agencies are not new with doing, and coordinated case planning. And it really takes the concept further by including shared funding and organizational level collaboration to really bundle services. So we're really hoping to provide you context around bundled service models, how they're designed, implemented, and evaluated across the human service landscape. So I want to introduce myself, and then I'll pass it to Courtney to talk a little bit about herself. I'm Kristen Abner. I completed my PhD in sociology in 2014. My work was really around the role of the neighborhood and social support in child welfare involvement, to really think about how to build interventions within the context in which families reside. So I really like to think about, my dissertation really thought about additional services, so not really just thinking about child welfare in one single silo, but additional services and how services can really collaborate to support families in their neighborhoods. At ICF, I've been at ICF now for 11 years, and I've worked on a lot of projects focused on social programming for families around TANF, child welfare, asset building, transportation. I am the library and website task lead on the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse that I was mentioning that I'm going to talk about. And really a goal of the clearinghouse is to provide relevant resources and technical assistance to disseminate to practitioners, policymakers, and researchers in the field. And I'd like to share a fun fact about myself just so you're not staring at my face, and I like to give some context. I am a mom of 2 kids. I have an almost 3-year-old and a 7-month-old, and a 90-pound Labradoodle. And let me pass it on to Courtney to talk about herself, and then I will take it back over. So, Courtney?
I have to say that I'm always so delighted to come to these, oh, there we go, okay, making sure. Come to these events because you all have such an interesting capacity for having your finger on the pulse of the latest trends of what's happening in social services. And I think that's a real point of strength in community action and a real nod to you all for being open to what the research has to share with you, what the newest program evaluations are coming out to say, what the, you're talking about 2Gen and you're talking about new resources in financial competency and education. And I think your willingness to expose yourself to new information and this constant quest for improvement is quite admirable. So usually Kristen does this introduction part, but we wanted to test out, make sure y'all could hear me this morning or this afternoon. So I will simply share with you, many of you have heard our voices before. I've been around ICF now going on 16 years. I'm also a mom of 4, and believe it or not, the pets in my house outnumber the children. And I would also offer that my 5th child, if you will, is the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse. So you'll hear us talk about SSRC a lot. It's near and dear to our hearts, and we think that it's a great resource for you all to continue to benefit from. So Kristen's going to talk here towards the beginning, and you'll hear from me a little bit later in the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. So we always start, if you've listened to one of our webinars before, as Tiffany said, we've had a long-standing relationship with the LCRC, and we really like to give context for how long we've kind of been involved together. This is really part of our ongoing partnership with the LCRC and ICF, and ICF is a 5,000-person company, and we're only going to talk about the work of our little section. So we do work in what we call the family self-sufficiency line of business. So we really try through our work to promote self-sufficiency for families through we do program evaluation, research, technical assistance, and program capacity building. We've mentioned the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, but we also run the National Resource Center for Healthy Marriage and Families and the Office of Family Assistance Peer Technical Assistance Network, if you're familiar with those resources. So throughout our partnership, ICF's role has really been to provide information on the state of the research and practice on a variety of topics. And we also, like I said, will talk a little bit on how you can use the research in your own program. So we call this tips for replication. And really that kind of drives our overall purpose for these webinars. So in sum, we're hoping that this webinar will help you pull best practices from other programs, coupled with the research base, to be able to replicate in your own context to better serve the families that you work with. So I talked a little bit about kind of where we're going to go today, but we're going to give a brief overview and background of bundled services for those of you that may not be as familiar with it. Then we'll go into tips for translation, followed by examples of some bundled service programs, and then we'll conclude with a demo of the SSRC so you can find resources that are really relevant to your agency. And we'll go ahead and take questions at the end of the presentation, but go ahead and enter it in the Q&A box if a question comes to you in the middle. So I want to go a little bit over the resource packet that will be if it's not already posted, I know that Tiffany will and her team will be posting shortly. So what we did was we synthesized research and resources from the field on implementing and financing bundled services, and we organized them into 4 categories. So we have bundled services, and then blended or braided funding streams, pay for success models, and then we conclude with funding guides for specific program types or populations. Each one of these resources, if it's already located on the SSRC or the OFA PRTA network, that link will be provided for you. So if you click on one and it's in the SSRC, you'll go to the SSRC and you'll see that resource is what we call record. And you'll see that our team of folks have already kind of gone through the research for you and provided information on what target population is the report about, what is the research methodology, and what are the specific topic areas. So I want to talk a little bit about each one of these 4 things before I move forward that are in the resource packet. The first section is really generally on bundled service approaches. So there's one resource that I'm going to talk about shortly from the Annie E. Casey Foundation on their Center for Working Families approach to bundled services. Another report that's on an integrated service project in Minnesota, which talks about participant characteristics. And that program was designed in Minnesota to really coordinate services across the human service spectrum. And then the second part, we'll move to blended or braided funding streams. And these resources really give a nice broad overview of how to blend or braid funding. There are toolkits and frameworks in there from multiple organizations. We include one from the Association of Government Accounts, the APHSA, the National Center on Secondary Education and Transition. And we also there's a resource that's a program example from New York on the Early Learn New York City child care program that braided together child care, Head Start, and state pre-K funding. So that may be interesting for folks to look at in the child care world. Third, we'll talk about pay for success models, and we talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation, but these models have really emerged as a strategy to use private investments to fund outcomes instead of programs, so that may also be an option for using different kinds of funding streams. Finally, we include funding guides for specific program types and populations. So these are more specific to, we have one that's on career pathways programs, a few that are on braided and blending funding for healthcare, behavioral health disorders, early learning programs, disconnected youth or youth transitioning, and then also we have one on providing services for folks with disabilities. So I encourage you to take a look at that and pull out what's important to you as you are thinking about how you're going to go about this approach in your agency. So I'd really like to encourage you all right now to use the chat box in the WebEx window and let us know, is your community action bundling services, and what types of services are you bundling? I'm having technical difficulties, and I don't see the chat window, but I'm sure that folks are typing in it as we speak.
Hi, Kristen. This is Hyacinth. We're actually getting some in on our end, so I'll go ahead and read them out, see if that's okay.
Great.
We're seeing a couple. I see one on VITA and SNAP outreach. Another that came in is on Head Start and child care funds. Another organization is doing bundling financial coaching and empowerment programs. We're getting a lot of answers here. We see another about energy assistance, essential home repair, and weatherization.
Great, and you know, Courtney and I will talk a little bit later about kind of what types of, in the research, what we've seen about what kind of services are bundling. And one of the key things that we've seen is a lot of them include this kind of financial coaching and piece. And I think you said VITA, so that obviously related to that, you know, helping folks to get their EITC and build assets. So that's great. The Head Start and child care, that Early Learn New York article would definitely be helpful for that. And also, I'll talk a little bit about a study that CAP did later talking about emergency assistance, so that energy and home repair, that's obviously definitely relevant to that. So thank you all very much for sharing. I'm going to pass this over to Courtney to talk about the next few slides. So Courtney?
Okay, there we go. Hello again, everybody. I think I even have control over the slides, so hopefully we can go forward. So what I think is most interesting about that, and if we had more time, I would actually just ask them to unmute all of you and listen to you talk about all of the cool bundling that you're already doing. So I would love to just have an opportunity to listen to you and learn from all of you and the experiences that you've had. You know, Kristen and I have we sort of necessarily have some distance from this work, and we have this research lens and this evaluated lens, but it's always great to get down and talk with folks who are really doing some of this interesting work on the ground. So this section of the presentation is giving some background and overview. We know some of you have had some exposure, obviously, to this work and this content, and we know that some of you maybe are less familiar with some of these terms. So I think it's really valuable to, and again, on the same page with terminology. And I was thinking about this morning, and it's 3V baseball season up here in Michigan. So we have braided, blended, and bundled playing baseball today in my world. But this definition that's on your screen right now is from the Association of Government Accountants via the National Resource Network. And I have no shame admitting to you that I did not know there was a National Association of Government Accountants until we started looking into this a little bit more deeply. But these are very heavy accountant-friendly words. So with a nod to all of our accountants who might be on the line today, what this basically says is that there's different ways that you can fund your bundled services. You can braid them or you can blend them. And what that means is if you braid them, each individual funding stream retains its character, retains its individual identity, its individual requirements. The metaphor for me is really the salad, right? So you're going to take all these pieces, you're going to mix them up together into a cohesive thing, but you're still going to be able to identify your tomatoes and your cucumbers and your lettuce and the other components of what makes that salad. Whereas a blended funding, you're going to go ahead and you're going to merge all those pieces together. So they're going to form a cohesive unit, but the individual character of each particular piece might be less visible. So I think of that as more like a smoothie or anything else that you could blend. So if you're hungry for the rest of the webinar, you can blame me in slide 17. I think it's important to talk about these strategies because finance is often the biggest stumbling block that we hear when people start talking about any kind of innovation. And even innovations that we are fairly confident will give us a return on investment and give us longer-term cost efficiencies, have startup costs, and getting over that hurdle can be really problematic for folks. So we just want to have the terminology down when we talk about what exactly we mean. So why would you want to do that in the first place? You know, we talked about this from the beginning, and when Tiffany first brought this topic to us, and you all have your mission statement at the front, and I think it's great that you read that at the start of your learning opportunities and stay connected and grounded in the work that you do. When I hear you talking about embodying the spirit of hope, improving communities, and caring about the entire community, it's this holistic notion, right? And that's where bundled services is coming from. So instead of having this intensely fragmented or overwhelmingly overlapped system or this hugely duplicative system, and what ends up happening, especially in the duplication universe, and the research tells us, is that not only are you spending enormous amounts of money to provide duplicated services, but you're also duplicating all of the requirements on the participant, many of which are even in conflict. So they're being asked to do competing and conflicting things at the same time. And so having this model of more integrated and smart and cohesive services, that facilitates that type of empowerment that you're looking for in your community action model. And I think that we have come, I think, when we look at the literature over the last, say, 2 decades, fragmentation was well documented and fairly well understood, but unfortunately when we moved towards fixing it, we really did kind of move into these overlap and duplication type quadrants. And so starting to see some of the new ideas around how we can do a better job of bundling coming out now. So bundled services, right? When people hear bundled services, I don't know about you all, but if I were to go to the dinner table tonight and tell my husband I was doing a class on, or a presentation on bundled services, he would probably think that I had gotten on the phone with like the telecommunications people, right? This is what we think of when we hear bundled services, that we're going to, get our phone and internet and cable all bundled up together. But the reality is that the term has become popular in lots of domains, and it runs the gamut from telecommunications to financial planning, and all the way over into our world here in human and social services. And really, all of those things, the reason they share that same term is that they're all motivated by the same objective, and it's about centralizing service delivery and creating a single point of access. And certainly the folks in the telecommunications and the financial planning world have their eye on profit, and they're thinking about that and maximizing their market share. But we have a not dissimilar objective in social services. We use different terms for it, but we're talking about efficiently and effectively meeting the needs of families in poverty. So rather than filling out those multiple applications or going to office appointments all across town when you don't have transportation, to get the services and benefits your family needs, it's more doable for that family in need. It's more reasonable for the case managers who are working on the case, and it provides cost and time efficiencies for everybody, just like the cable guy coming out to fix your internet and your phone at the same time. So when we bundle our service delivery, and this is just a small sampling of the types of work that you all are doing that you mentioned in the chat box earlier, this single point of contact in the middle, this skilled, trained caseworker or case manager, typically the models that we see in the literature this is sort of your super case manager, right, with extra training and experience that can connect families to an array of services, and very importantly, help that family to set achievable goals on the journey to self-sufficiency. We're doing a lot of work right now in the space of personal agency and helping families and participants in programs to drive their own journey to self-sufficiency, right? It's unreasonable to guide someone through a process in which you give them the direction of what they have to do at every step and what their eventual outcomes will look like, and then push them out the door and say, okay, now go forth and be responsible for every decision and every outcome and everything without giving them sort of the space to maximize their ability to execute those tasks. And so we think that this model really lends itself well to figuring out how that personal agency can work in creating that trusted relationship. So we can get a customized mix of services for a particular family, in a particular community, in the appropriate blend and mix of all of these different types of solutions. What we also are excited about is when you look at all of these ovals around this highly skilled case manager, these are still reliably the topics that people tell us drive the journey to self-sufficiency, and that makes us happy because those are the research topics that our library is organized into. So you can find information on all of these in the collection, and we can monitor, therefore, the research that's being done in these different domains, and we see sort of ebbs and flows of research over time. I mentioned how you all have your finger on the pulse of a great number of the current trends and the current hot topics like 2Gen, executive function. But we know what we're seeing a little bit of a pickup now is from transportation. It took like a 5-year layoff from any new research around the importance of transportation, but we're starting to talk about it again. So all of these things really fit together to provide that journey to self-sufficiency for families. Kristen, I'm going to hand it back to you to talk to our friends about the work that Annie and Casey is doing.
Sure thing. I think you passed me the ball, Courtney. There we go. Thank you. So I mentioned this Annie E. Casey report briefly when I was talking about the packet, and I want to talk a little bit more about it. The Annie E. Casey Foundation devised the Center for Working Families approach to help provide integrated services for low-income families. So this approach really was focused on 3 overlapping areas. So employment services, so job readiness, job placement, skills training, financial services, which included like financial workshops, counseling, classes, asset building information, and then finally benefits and work support. So helping folks get the benefits they need, accessing tax credits, financial aid for education, and things like that. So there were 3 attributes that you'll see on this slide that CWF programs were implementing. They bundle and sequence services rather than just offering one component. So really integrating and offering the services in a seamless way in the areas that on the previous slide, so employment, benefits and work supports, and financial services. And really what they helped the programs, I believe that the report talked about 14 programs that were implementing this approach, that they really helped them have a well-planned program design, hire and train staff with strong skills and backgrounds, and really thoughtfully using technology and data collection when kind of building this approach. Strong partnerships with other organizations and service providers help to give these programs the ability to offer more services. Programs are really focused on collecting and analyzing data to improve their performance. You know, we really live in a data-driven world. So programs really had to kind of adjust to really how to collect the right data and use it to inform their practice and measure change over time. And finally, another key component was really include this financial services piece and coaching and help folks set goals and really change behavior in the long term to promote self-sufficiency. So I want to talk about 3 examples from the report, and if you want to read more about them, obviously go to the packet, open the report, and take a look. So in St. Louis, this was a CWF program that started in 2006, and it was a regional workforce training program and integrated multiple services into one of its family life programs aimed at families with multiple barriers. So it ended up serving about half of the TANF participants in the St. Louis region and drew from TANF, WIOA funding, and private funding sources. They provided services across the 3 areas that I talked about: employment, benefits and work support, and financial services. As a result, then I'm going to report on some data from 2006 to 2010. 60% of clients received bundled services costing about $2,000 per participant who would access 2 or more services. And 86% of the clients receiving the bundled services achieved short-term economic outcomes, such as getting a job, compared to just 12% of clients in other groups that had not received the bundled services. 18% of clients that had received the bundled services achieved a major economic outcome. So this means like a purchase of an asset like a home or a car, compared to just 5% who just received only one service. And one of the key components of this program was that really sat down and did individualized assessments with the families and then developed a comprehensive plan based on that individual assessment to really tailor the services to each of the families. So in Baltimore, this was a smaller community-based program in Baltimore, and really is a good example of how to integrate this approach into a community initiative that's already providing services. So they began to help clients identify and benefits and work supports for which they were already eligible. And this was done actually during a 4-week job readiness training, which used Seed Code's Earned Benefit Screening Tool. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with that screening tool. And they found that the screening was really helpful for clients who had misconceptions about eligibility requirements for certain programs and you know, feel like they didn't know that they were eligible for programs. So this screening tool really helped them to identify, help clients in the job readiness program, what other services they could get. Their population were a low-income residents of the neighborhood, and it included many folks that were in transitional housing, former prisoners, or recovering substance abusers. So folks with multiple barriers. Their 4-week program also included post that 4-week financial coaching and employment services, networking assistance, and accessing apprenticeships for jobs. Finally, I just will talk quickly about New Mexico. This program was focused at a community college. So they recruited students who had come to the Achievement Center of the community college to meet with what they called an achievement coach to help them develop a plan. And so this plan included things like financial literacy, classes, budgeting, benefit screening, and how to do continued education. There was an analysis done on the New Mexico program that found that 88% of the college's CWF clients received bundled services, and those that received a bundled service had a 61% chance of achieving a short-term economic indicator, so receiving a scholarship or staying in school, compared with just 16% of clients who didn't receive bundled services. So obviously, if you're interested, go to that report in the packet. It has really, it includes outcomes that these programs have seen from doing a bundled service approach. So I think that's helpful, you know, when you're trying to do this in your own program, really go back and look at, okay, which one of these is most like me? Or, you know, do I have a community college partner that we can partner with to make this work? So I'm going to conclude because I wanted to talk about one of the really important parts of this report is that it talks about lessons learned. So building on an organization's strengths, focusing program design on intentionally bundling services across the areas that your organization is going to bundle. Using information technology to your advantage to help programs be more effective and efficient, using, you know, online benefit screening tools to help determine client eligibility, using data to track progress and assess program results, having financial coaches on staff who can really sit down with folks and help them budget and help them build assets, and really having that specialized skill to develop a relationship with a client that can be long-term. Another lesson learned was having program staff understand all the services and supports offered. So as an example, somebody that works in employment and training should know what the financial literacy folks do and be able to explain to a client how to use it and why it's important and how to access it. Strong communication with clients is vital to help them understand the services that are offered, and again, why they're important. And I think Courtney's going to talk a little bit about this later, but, you know, building partnerships with other entities to provide a full range of services in a seamless way for clients. So that partnership and collaboration piece is really important when implementing this approach. So I want to highlight, this was a study that Tiffany shared with me. CAP did a study, and maybe some of you were involved with the survey of 247 agencies on bundled service approaches. And of the 247 agencies, 197 answered relating to the services included in their bundle. And 98% said that emergency or tangible assistance was included. 74% said financial literacy and asset management, 74% for housing assistance included, 67% for employment and training, 59% on Head Start and early Head Start, 48% on transportation, and 31% bundling child care. So, and how many bundles are your CAP including together? So, as you can see from this slide, most CAPs in the study are bundling 4 and 5 services together. And I know you'll be interested in the next slide to show what are those top 5 areas that are getting bundled together. So this was from, let's see, 15 agencies. Emergency assistance, employment and training, transportation, housing, and then again that financial literacy asset management piece. I also, let's see, where, okay. So, again, I'm going to move you to your chat box to let us know kind of what challenges are you facing with doing the bundled services approach, if you're doing it, or if not, what are challenges to maybe implementing this approach that you foresee? And I'll ask Tiffany to share if there's anything in the chat box, because I don't see anything on my end. Okay, I have one. I'm a bundle of services case manager and cover all the barriers to my clients, and the challenge is keeping clients engaged and active when services and money runs out. That's a really great point. You know, and I think that, you know, kind of what we've seen and kind of what I was talking about in the CWF approach is really having that long-term financial literacy piece as folks kind of quote unquote graduate out of a program is really important in trying to keep folks engaged.
Kristen, there's another comment here that folks struggle with when a client is dropped from one program and they're, as a result, dropped from all others. You know, it's an interesting sort of retrospective on where we've come as a program, right? When we delinked eligibility back in, you know, 2 decades ago when we decided we were going to sever eligibility between programs, and now we're sort of coming full circle and talking about reintegrating the programs together. So it's an interesting challenge, as I'm also seeing challenges around tracking and appropriate assessment and making sure folks are getting routed into the right place.
Courtney, I think I'll pass it on to you at this point, unless there are other challenges that we want to highlight. I don't see any more coming through on my end, but I think my chat box is having technical difficulties.
Sure, that's fine, Kristen. If you want to pass the ball back over, the others that I'm seeing are about, again, tracking, reporting, and then, of course, sharing resources, which I think is one of the biggest ones that we've talked about a couple of different times. So we're going to move forward here a little bit, if I can make a little guy go. There we go. Okay, so tips for translation is the part of the presentation, and we think we're so catchy with our titles. We hope you like them. That is about helping you figure out strategies for translating some of this research into the work that you're already doing on the ground. And the first one, I'm going to ask everyone to bear with me because I know as soon as I say it, I'm going to see a whole bunch of little red exclamation points that everyone is going to want to walk away because you're not going to want to hear what I have to say. But it is about collaboration, and just bear with me for a second because I think I have something new to contribute to this discussion, because we know everyone's heard it, right? You've heard it, it's a buzzword, it's an unarticulated mandate. Everyone tells you to go forth and collaborate, but they don't tell you what that means, they don't tell you how to do it. It's just sort of one-hit wonder in the popular culture space, right, where we're just tired of hearing about it now. But we also at the same time know, both intuitively and from the research, that you can't create a collaborative bundled service of solutions for a family if you're not doing it collaboratively in the first place. And we also know that we work with absolutely brilliant, passionate colleagues within our organization, outside of our organization, in our communities, and we have to figure out how to actively work with those folks. And I took this picture from our very smart friends out in the Phoenix public school system, and the reason for it is actually very intentional. It's not just it's colorful and bright, and I think it's cute, although all of those things are true. I think that the message at the end of the day is, in order for us to collaborate effectively, we first have to deal with the possibility, in fact, the likelihood, that we are not the ones holding the last piece of the puzzle. And it's very, very hard, especially in an environment of scant resources where, even though we don't want to be in competition, we are, to deal with the possibility or even the probability that the partner that has that missing piece sits outside of our organization and comes potentially with a different set of funding requirements and a different set of expectations. When we talk about collaboration, research tells us that most people think that they're really good at it and that they're doing it regularly. It also tells us that they're not. And we build these platforms and we study whether we want to use, SharePoint or Yammer or the newest IT solution to facilitate collaboration that's supposed to make us work together better. But the problem is that we collaborate without a real firm commitment to what our value, what is the value of the person on the other side of the table. Could they possibly be the ones holding that missing piece of the puzzle? Folks in the literature will describe this phenomenon as co-laboring as opposed to collaborating. The idea that we're sitting around the table, we're working together in theory. We have a problem that we're solving, and it might even be the same problem that the person on the other side of the table is trying to solve, but we aren't sharing the problem. We aren't owning the fact that we're actually sharing the problem. So there was a question that popped up in the chat about if folks come to this solution in a braided environment, a braided funding environment, how can you have shared outcomes if the funding requirements are different and the expectations and outcomes that you're being held to are tied to your funding stream? We recognize that's a very real consideration. We do have a couple of ideas for you about that. At the end of the day, research tells us that successful collaboration isn't going to be about the technology or the tools, and it's going to happen despite some of these challenges and not really because of them. There's a great social innovation thinker, if you don't know him, you should Google him, Ephraim Fried, and he tells us, this is a quote, "Collaboration is a deeply human activity, and no tool on its own can solve the problem of poor collaboration." So while I have all the respect in the world for our friends at the Casey Foundation, tools and online resources that help you track, that help you report, that help you manage data, all of the things I heard you say in the chat were a challenge for you, 100% agree. But we're not going to be able to get to the core business of collaboration without context and shared direction, which is actually about tip 2. So these are my activists, all of us who think we have all the answers to fix the world and change the world. and we're going to start with our common goal, right? And then this is what happens. And it's very, very common, and it is exactly how every conversation that starts with this question would go. So if you wanted to do an interesting and educational social experiment, gather a group of stakeholders together, put them at a table, and attempt to define collaboration collaboratively. So everybody on the call right now is shuddering, imagining how awful that conversation would be and how desperately you would want to get up and leave the table. Without question, it would be a challenging and unpleasant task. However, if we change the assignment slightly in small but meaningful ways, we could make that conversation a lot less unpleasant and a lot more doable. So for example, instead of just telling you to gather some stakeholders and sit around a table, I could tell you who the stakeholders are. Or at a minimum, I could provide you with enough context to know whether or not you should invite your colleagues, your book club, your daughter's soccer team, your neighbors, right? You need to know who the appropriate stakeholders are. You need to know the context of the work that you're trying to do. I could tell you what we were trying to collaborate about, give you a sense of the landscape, because we know that collaboration doesn't look the same in every setting or in every instance or for every purpose. I could provide you with some kind of information about collaboration that's worked for similar groups or folks in similar missions, and I could tell you why I wanted you to define collaboration. I could help you articulate the objective of the group. If we do all of those things, the insurmountable task of defining collaboration becomes much more manageable by breaking it into discrete steps that have foundational, objective expectations. If I did all of those things, you'd know who the right people were, you'd know what to do with them, you could gather, map your resources, and figure out where you want to go. With some support, you could even figure out what your theory of change looks like and identify opportunities to share information. Those of you who may have heard me speak at the last convention in San Francisco heard me talking about logic models, and I also said that people were going to run screaming from the room when I started that conversation. But I think that these are really important tools that unfortunately get a bit of a bad rap. And we can provide that kind of support to help people move from, I love this graphic, this is the logic model repair shop, trying to go from this incredibly jumbled sense of where exactly we're trying to go, where you're trying to be all things to all people. Because that is one of the biggest challenges with bundled services, right? We ask you, how many things are you bundling? How comprehensive are you being? Exactly how well do you bundle? Can I get cable, internet, and phone, or can I just get cable and internet? But the reality is, if you have a lousy voice over IP program, if you have a lousy phone system, you're better off offering your customers just cable and internet. So we really want folks to be thoughtful about what they're bundling and why, and what the journey of the program looks like. If you can make a clear linear logic model of your program operations rather than that kind of jumbled mess, then you can be competitive in today's bundled services environment. All right, so we're going to try and be competitive. How are we going to do that? So we're going to talk a little bit about innovative solutions today. And the biggest one that's getting the most press right now are pay-for-success models. So if you've got this innovative solution, you've got the missing piece of the puzzle, but you've also got program fragmentation, administrative rules, technology infrastructure, all the things that you just told us are being challenges. That gap can really often be bridged by some of these successful models. Oh, and you know what? I'm going to try and see some of these questions in the chat. We're going to have to get to some of those at the end, guys, but keep them coming. When we talk about pay-for-success models, and I want to give credit to one of our fantastically brilliant colleagues who did this graphic, and Kristen mentioned this sentence earlier, and I'm actually going to say it again verbatim because I think it's the easiest way to understand what this is all about. Unlike traditionally funded, traditional funding streams where we pay for programs, pay-for-success models pay for outcomes. And you have to get creative when you're thinking about how to set these up, but the potential payoff is better outcomes for families in poverty and a streamlined system for navigating what that system looks like. So Pay for Success, it has other names. You may have heard social impact bonds or social innovation bonds. Comes from the notion that despite this vast array of programs that people are operating and offering and participating in, we actually don't really know very much about which of them work and under which circumstances. We still have amazing success stories, but we don't know what it is about that person, that family, that circumstance that allowed them to be successful, at least not on a large scale. So I'm actually going to ask Natalie, I think, who's going to show us the video, because A, it gives you a break from Kristen and I, and B, our friends at the Urban Institute have done a fantastic job of describing why Pay for Success is interesting and innovative.
So if folks are not watching the video, you'll see it came up in the media viewer. You have to actually click play yourself. Hello? Hello?
Okay, so I know that folks may have started that video at different points in time, so we will make sure that the link goes out in case folks are still watching the end. But for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and move on just a little bit. I want to share with you that pay-for-success models are really enjoying a great deal of exposure and study in the literature right now, and folks beyond our friends at the Urban Institute are doing great work in that space. The Corporation for National and Community Service is actually is a grant-making capacity as well as doing a national evaluation of what they call their Social Innovation Fund projects. The snapshots that are on these pages, and I know we're going to have the slides available to folks, are interesting because, well, first of all, a friend and former colleague of ours is leading the research on this effort, but also it really shows the gamut of ways that you can integrate this type of model into your program, so from early education to reentry and also employment and other programs. You'll notice on these cards that there's variability in size, location, program model, intermediary, area of focus. And the literature review itself, the documents that these are drawn from, provides really valuable information about program design, meta-analysis, and how you can go about really making sure you're setting smart metrics and smart outcomes. We had in the slide deck here a plan to go through the SSRC in a little bit more detail, but I think, Kristen, we might be running a little shy on time. So Tiffany, did you want us to go ahead and work on some of the Q&A? Did I understand that direction correctly? Okay. So Kristen, I can hand this back to you to do an overview of the SSRC, or Tiffany and Natalie, if you prefer us to go into some of the question and answer, we can do that.
Yes, so if you could go into the question and answer component, that would be great.
Okay, so so this PowerPoint is going to go out to folks. I saw that question come in and be answered. Kristen, I'm going to go through these slides. I'm going to put this one up for just a moment. This is the URL to the SSRC for those of you who may not be as familiar with it. And you can learn a little bit more about who we are and what we do. So some of the questions that have been coming in, I'm going to try and go through them to the best of my ability here. One of the first ones that came in was fairly early. I just want to scroll up, please bear with me, friends. One of the questions that came in early was the notion that if braided funding inherently creates siloed service provision, and if so, how can an agency strategize to bundle services despite braided funding streams, which might be inevitable given things like the nature of grants? When this first came in, I was really excited about the question because I think that when you're talking about a funding situation where you have discrete, maintained funding streams flowing into a common pot, and you're expected to bundle those things and turn around a successful model of integrated services, there are three places where you absolutely have to make sure that you have really solid ground under you, or it can go sideways in a hurry. And I think the first is that all of the agents responsible for those various funding streams have to be totally clear on what is and is not allowed between the others. So, you know, if you make a salad and one person is allergic to black olives, then all of a sudden that whole group of people can't eat that salad because it's touched everything. So you have to make sure that, you know, everything that you're putting into there is legit for all of the funders across the board. And the next is that you have to make sure that the intermediary, I guess, in this case, the salad bowl, I'm not really sure how well the metaphor holds up here, but that the intermediary who's holding and collecting all of those resources before turning around and and passing it out, especially if that's you, has an even deeper understanding of what those allowable services are. And then I think if you think about coming at it from the point of view of the participant, in order for this collaboration to make sense, you first have to have that shared objective like we talked about. And you have to find in that bundled service the common point of service for the participant or the family that you're talking about. So while it's tempting to just say, well, the research says we'll get better return on investment if we bundle our services, let's throw everything into the pot. That really isn't the way to go. You have to make sure that you're sharing that common purpose and understanding why you're all sitting at that particular table at the same time. Okay, I'm scrolling down because there are a couple more questions, but they're at the bottom. Do you have any advice about how to answer to all funding sources, especially those unfamiliar with bundled services? Some funders think that their service might be shortchanged. So this is a question of managing the communication in the other direction, right? So organizations A, B, and C have tossed their resources into the pot, and they want to make sure that the program issue or problem they care about is getting its fair share. I would say that that is a level of expectation that you want to set before the first program is offered, the first service is delivered. There's great research in the SIF world about return on investment and what that looks like, but it is a matter of sharing that equation with that funder in a way that they can understand. So if their historic metrics have all been, you know, a 35% reduction in number of juvenile incarcerations, and your new metric is going to be about, you know, days in school and days out of beds and days, you know, if you're going to completely change what success looks like, then they have to be on board with a new vision for what success looks like. And then I think we have time for one more, Kristen, and then I'll ask if there's anything you want to add. When you take the lead on bundling services, other agencies tend to rely on you to move all those services forward. Yeah, can you suggest any strategies on dealing with lack of accountability with other agencies? So obviously we want to make sure we're choosing our partners carefully and wisely. And I would say that while you want to partner with folks that you trust and that you know will do good work, in the same way that you don't want to borrow money from family, you want to make sure that these relationships are really codified. There needs to be memoranda of understanding. There needs to be official, you know, contractual relationships between organizations when you start talking about mixing your money. So I would suggest, you know, really formalized relationships, formalized expectations, and pre-agreed upon sort of consequences, for lack of a better term, about what's going to happen if expectation A, B, and C are not met or not followed through on. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Kristen, is there anything you want to add before we hand this back to Tiffany?
Yeah, I did. On the last point on formalizing the relationship, I just kind of wanted to add that, you know, what we've kind of seen is, you know, constant communication with partners and is helpful. And like even a weekly 15-minute check-in that's scheduled every week. For some of the organizations we've worked with collaboration, you know, just a 15-minute check-in to make sure that expectations are met and things are moving along. And, you know, if they don't need the meeting, they end up canceling it. Is helpful in terms of, you know, keeping everybody accountable and moving processes forward. So I just wanted to offer that up. But other than that, thank you very much, Courtney. And Tiffany, wanted to pass it back to you to see if there's anything else you wanted us to talk about.
Thank you very much. I think you laid the groundwork very well for us, and we encourage folks to check out the wonderful resource guide that you all have put together, and we're just going to wrap up by making a couple of announcements.
So thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. We really appreciate your patience, and thank you again to our wonderful presenters. So we wanted to address you we wanted to direct you again to the resource packet that was presented today. That was shared with you guys in the chat window. We also wanted to share with you a previous bundled services packet that the partnership has put together based on the lessons learned from our last cohort of the learning community. So you can actually click on the link on your screen. You should be able to see that here. Also, we would be remiss if we didn't advertise some of our upcoming webinar events. Our next webinar is scheduled for June 15th, and that will be on decreasing family homelessness, and that will be presented in collaboration with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So we hope you can join us for that. Our next upcoming webinar is scheduled for June 29th, and that is for our Open LCG, the National Poverty Trends session. So if you're interested about facts and statistics and policy around poverty in America, please do join us for that event. Here you'll find the contact info for the LCRC team. Please feel free to reach out to any of us with any questions or concerns that you might have. Of course, a shameless final plug for our conference. We hope that you all can join us in Austin in August for our annual convention. And with that, I think we will go ahead and close. Thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.